In March of 2013, a loss prevention officer at a retail store in Knoxville, Tennessee, was fast-forwarding through security footage when she saw something that made her stop. A teenage boy, gray hoodie, medium brown hair, lean build, was approaching the automatic sliding doors at the main entrance. He stopped. He looked up at the doorframe. He held that look for approximately 2 seconds. Then he walked through. That was March 3rd, 2013. The loss prevention officer called her manager. Her manager called Knoxville PD. Knoxville PD called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And an NCMH specialist pulled up a case file she had not looked at in some time and read a single line. A behavioral identifier, filed on September 14, 2005, on the worst night of a mother's life. The specialist watched the footage. Then she watched it again, frame by frame, beginning at 14:14:02. At the 20-second mark, 14:14:14:22, the boy who had just walked through the door moved his left hand to his front pants pocket, one press, flat palm. Then he kept walking. That detail was not in any press release, not in any public bulletin, not anywhere a person could have read it and rehearsed it. It was in a case file note from 2008, written by hand by a Kentucky State Police detective during a phone call on a September anniversary. It was not a coincidence. The boy in the footage had been missing for 2,727 days. He had vanished from a 95-foot driveway in Harlan County, Kentucky, on a Wednesday afternoon when his mother was 20 feet away, inside the house, and no one heard a sound. The footage existed because of an 18-hour retention cycle. If the loss prevention officer had waited until the following morning, if she had gone home, slept, come back to it, camera 7 would have recorded over itself and the frame would have been gone. She didn't wait. You'll see how a 7-year-old boy's most private habits survived 8 years of disappearance intact, and why that mattered more than any photograph ever could. How a detective kept a phone call appointment on September 14th every year for 8 years, and what she wrote down when no one was watching, and how a gesture, 2 seconds, flat palm, left pocket, brought a boy back from a place nobody knew to look. This is the Ethan Reese case. The disappearance that was solved not by evidence, but by the things a person can't be taught to forget. Harlan County, Kentucky, September 14th, 2005. The bus was on time. We identify missing children by their faces, by their hair color, their height, the shape of their jaw at a given age. We commission age progression images that do their best arithmetic, shaving childhood softness, adding years to cheekbones, projecting into the future a face we last knew in the past. Faces change, we update the images. What doesn't change is the body's quiet grammar, the habits formed before a person knows they're forming them, the gestures that live below language, below memory, below anything that can be coached or commanded away. Ethan Reese's face at 15 would look nothing like his face at 7. But the way he approached a door that was written into him before he had words for it, and no one in the end could take it back. Wednesday, September 14th, 2005, Harlan County, Kentucky. 6:45 in the morning. The house on Clover Fork Road was white clapboard with green shutters, a storm door propped open in warm weather with a brick, a backyard where a red oak stood at the left corner wide enough that a 7-year-old could not put his arms around it. The boy who lived there had named the oak Gerald. He left it small offerings every Sunday, a smooth stone placed at the base without ceremony. He had been doing this for 2 years and saw no reason to stop. His name was Ethan James Reese. Before he spoke to anyone in the house, before he spoke to his mother or his brother or his father on the mornings his father was home, Ethan went to the Beagle. Biscuit was 9 years old and slept in the kitchen, and every morning without exception, Ethan crossed to where the dog lay, crouched to eye level, and said, in a voice that was formal, almost ceremonial, "Good morning, Biscuit." Only then did he speak to people. This was not a rule anyone had made, it was simply how mornings worked. Then the cereal, he sorted it first, always, every time, lightest pieces to darkest. Eating in order, the lightest first. She placed his juice glass on the left side of the bowl, always on the left, and ate without reading, without watching the TV. His brother had already turned on in the other room. He was thinking something. He was usually thinking something. His mother, Sandra, watching from the other side of the counter, had learned not to interrupt the cereal sort. She just watched his hands move, item by item, and felt the particular tenderness of a person watching a person be entirely themselves. Sandra Reese was 34 years old that September and expressed love through preparation the way other people expressed it through words. She had packed his lunch the night before. She had signed the permission slip for the October field trip 6 weeks in advance. She kept a laminated schedule of school events on the inside of the kitchen cabinet door, not because she needed to, but because seeing it each morning reminded her that the days had a shape, that the shape was knowable, that she was on top of it. What strangers read as anxiety, her family understood as devotion. She had noticed the patch on the left elbow of Ethan's hoodie was beginning to peel. She had been meaning to iron it down again. She would do it Sunday. The hoodie was army green from Walmart, slightly too large in the shoulders. He wore it every fall day, regardless of the temperature. Sandra had started calling it his armor, quietly to herself, because that was what it seemed to be, not protection from weather but from something more ambient. Something that a 7-year-old couldn't name but knew was out there. The dinosaur patch was her addition, ironed on after a tear at the elbow. And he had accepted it without complaint and without enthusiasm, the way he accepted most things he hadn't chosen. He wore it that morning. White long-sleeved undershirt underneath blue jeans, gray New Balance sneakers, and in his left pocket, one smooth gray Riverstone taken from the windowsill where he kept his current collection, the others lined up in a row, this one chosen that morning in a process that appeared random and was not. The weight of it settled against his hip as he stood up from the kitchen table. He pressed his left hand flat against his pocket. The stone was there, across the kitchen. His father, Roy, was making pancakes. Roy Reese worked at the Black Mountain Coal Prep Plant, 6 a.m. to 3:30, and on weekday mornings he was usually gone before Ethan woke. But on Saturdays, this was the thing. This was the ritual. Neither of them had ever named Roy made pancakes, and Ethan sat on the counter and handed him ingredients one at a time. Even ingredients Roy didn't need yet. Roy always reached out his hand, and Ethan placed something in it, a measuring cup, a spatula, a single blueberry. And Roy said thank you and set it down. It was Wednesday and Roy was at the plant. But the pancake ritual had happened Saturday, 4 days before, and would happen again the Saturday after. And the Saturday after that. Ethan understood this with the certainty that he understood all recurring things. They continued until they didn't, and there was no use thinking about the stopping. His brother Daniel knocked on the doorframe as he passed on his way to the bathroom. Not stopping, just the knock. 2 knuckles in motion. Ethan, at the table, knocked back on the wall without looking up. The exchange took under 2 seconds and was never missed. At 7:20, Sandra walked him to the end of the driveway. Bus 14 came at 7:28, and Ethan stood facing the road while he waited, hands in his pockets, counting something under his breath that Sandra had never been able to make out. She counted the 11 stairs to his classroom every morning when he arrived. He counted every staircase he ever climbed, starting from 1, going back to the bottom if interrupted. His classmates had learned not to talk to him on stairs. Before he stepped onto the bus, he paused at the first step, looked up at the overhead door frame, the same as always, the same as every door, a 2-second look at the frame before crossing the threshold, then climbed on. Sandra watched the bus pull away. She went back inside. In Ethan's room, on his nightstand, the book his grandmother had given him 3 weeks ago lay open to pages 34 and 35. Bridges, Spanning the World, a children's illustrated edition, blue spine, full-color drawings of suspension cables against painted skies. She had asked for it for his birthday. He had been drawing bridges in his spiral notebook for most of the year. Not cartoons, but architectural shapes. The geometry of structures designed to hold weight between 2 separate places. He wanted to build one someday. He had told Sandra this with complete seriousness, and she had believed him. The book was open to the suspension bridge spread. His finger smudge sat just below center on the right page, faint and oval, the oil of his touch darkening the glossy paper in a way that only showed when the light caught it at an angle. That afternoon, when she found the house empty and went looking for some part of him that was still there, Sandra would find that book and not move it for 11 days. But that was later. Right now, it was morning, the specific, unrepeatable morning of September 14th, 2005, which would turn out to be the last morning of many things, though no one in the house on Clover Fork Road knew it yet. The bus was on time. The hills above Harlan County were just beginning to turn at the highest ridges, the first yellow creeping down from the peaks like something slow and inevitable. The storm door was propped with its brick. The dinosaur patch was peeling at the lower left corner and would be ironed down on Sunday. And then James Reese was 7 years old, and his world was a world of very specific things, held in very specific order, and that morning it was all still intact. School released at 3:10. Bus 14 ran its afternoon route in reverse of the morning, stopping at Clover Fork Road at 3:25. 4 children stepped off that afternoon: Ethan Reese, age 7, Cody Sutton, age 9, 2 houses down, Madison Goff, age 8. Next block, Brianna Hollis, age 6, corner house. The driver, Wendell Frazier, had run this route for 11 years. He knew every driveway. The afternoon light came in low and pale gold, the kind that makes everything cast a long shadow east. The hills above Harlan County were still heavy green, but beginning to turn at the highest ridges, the first yellow edges of something the season was becoming. The air was 71 degrees, dry and almost brittle, carrying the smell of cut grass from the Sutton yard and something sweet and slightly fermented from the crab apples that had fallen along the Patterson fence line. The hydraulic brakes exhaled. The door folded open. Children scattered. Cody Sutton asked Ethan if he wanted to come see his uncle's dirt bike. Ethan said he had to go home first and ask. This was not unusual. Ethan always checked in before detouring. It was not a rule his parents had made. It was simply a thing he knew about himself. The same way he knew he needed to say good morning to Biscuit before speaking to people. The same way he needed to look at the door frame before walking through it. The world had an order. He observed it, stood at the end of the driveway exactly where he always stood, and looked at the house. The storm door was propped open with its brick, the way it always was on warm afternoons. He could see through the screen into the kitchen, though Sandra was not visible. She was in the back room on the phone with Lorraine early because there was a casserole to start. He pressed his left hand flat against his left pocket. The stone was there. He started up the driveway. Wendell Frazier watched all 4 children reach their respective properties before pulling away. In his statement that evening, he said Ethan was walking normal, nothing odd, went up his driveway toward the house. This was at approximately 3:27 p.m. The pencil was still behind Ethan's right ear, exactly where it had been since he'd used it to sketch in his notebook on the ride home. He reached the storm door. He looked up at the door frame the way he always did, the 2-second pause before every threshold. He pushed the door. The brick shifted and held. And then nothing. No sound. No door. No Ethan. Between 3:27 p.m. and 3:47 p.m., in a 95-foot driveway in afternoon sunlight, within earshot of his mother, Ethan James Reese ceased to exist. No screeching tires, no raised voice. No door slamming. The flower bed beneath the front window was undisturbed. The gravel showed no scuffle, no drag marks, no signs of a fall. The storm door was exactly as it had been, brick wedged in place, meaning Ethan had never pushed it fully open, had never crossed the threshold, had never reached the house he was walking toward. He simply stopped existing somewhere between the road and the door. What he left behind wonder too. School pencil, yellow, lying in pale gray gravel, approximately 20 feet from the road and 45 feet from the storm door. It lay on its side at a slight angle. The late afternoon light caught it against the gray gravel. Later, when asked how she had noticed it, Sandra would say she didn't know. She was just looking at where he should have been, and she saw it, and she picked it up, and she held it, and she stood there for a long time in the driveway trying to understand what she was holding. So it was at a midpoint that made no sense. Not dropped at the road's edge as if he'd been pulled back toward a vehicle. Not near the storm door as if he'd dropped it reaching for the handle. Exactly between at a place where a child walking normally would have no reason to stop, at a place that only made sense if he had stopped mid-stride, and then not continued. There was no second step after the stop. Sandra came to the front door at 3:47 p.m. to call Ethan in for a snack. She opened the screen and looked at the yard. He was not in it. She said his name once, then again. She went to the porch and looked both ways down the street. The neighborhood was that particular mid-afternoon empty. The bus gone, the children scattered inside, no engines, no voices, just the distant sound of someone's television through a screen door 3 houses down. A game show. A buzzer. Applause. She did not run. Sandra Reese was not a woman who ran from things before she knew what they were. She walked quickly, arms crossed over her chest, holding herself to the end of the driveway, and looked both ways down Clover Fork Road. It was empty. She called to Cody Sutton, who was in his yard on the dirt bike. He said Ethan hadn't come over yet. She went back inside. She saw the storm door's brick exactly where it had been when she'd propped it that morning. She stood at the kitchen counter, both hands flat on the laminate surface. Wait forward, 11 seconds. Her mother would later count from Sandra's own description, and then picked up the phone. She did not pick it up because she knew something terrible had happened. She picked it up because she was a woman who acted before she spiraled, who moved toward the problem rather than away from it, who had always believed that preparation was a form of love and that action was a form of hope. She called the Sutton house. She called Cody's mother. Then she called the Harlan County Sheriff's Office and told the dispatcher, in a calm and specific voice, that her 7-year-old son had not come inside and she could not find him. The dispatcher noted in the call log, "Caller calm, specific, cooperative. Child last seen walking toward front door approximately 20 minutes ago." Because of Ethan's age, 7 years old, the call was treated as high priority. A sheriff's deputy was dispatched. At 3:49, before the deputy arrived, Sandra walked back to the driveway. That was when she saw the pencil. She recognized it. She had watched him sharpen it that morning at the kitchen table, testing the point against his thumb, the cedar and graphite smell of it drifting across the counter. It was lying in the gravel at the exact midpoint of the driveway, yellow against gray, and she crouched and picked it up, and she held it the way you hold something when you're trying to understand what it is doing where it is, which is to say she held it very still and said nothing. Think about where that pencil was. Not at the road, not at the door, exactly halfway, in a place that makes no sense if you're walking normally toward your house, in a place that only makes sense if you stopped walking and no one heard the stop. Deputy Carla Meade and Deputy Holt Vickers arrived at 4:03 p.m. Roy Reese pulled into the driveway at 4:03 p.m. Roy Reese pulled into the driveway at 4:30, his truck partially blocking the cruiser, and sat in it for 8 seconds before getting out. The deputies began an immediate canvass of the 2-block radius. By 6 p.m., 14 neighborhood volunteers were going door to door. By 6:15, Lorraine Combs had arrived with a pot of soup and said nothing about it. By 9:30, Sandra had called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. The NCME intake specialist asked the routine questions: physical description, last known clothing, any distinguishing marks. Sandra answered each one, her voice steady, giving the army green hoodie, the dinosaur patch on the left elbow, the gray New Balance sneakers, the grass-stained jeans, the river stone in the left pocket. Then the specialist asked her to describe any behavioral habits that might help identify Ethan if he was spotted in public. Sandra thought for a moment. He always looks up at the door before he walks through it, she said. Every door. Every time he stops, looks up at the frame, then walks through. The specialist typed it under behavioral identifiers and moved on to the next question. Sandra answered it. She answered all of them. She stayed on the phone for 47 minutes and gave them everything she had. What she gave them that night would sit in a database for 8 years, 1 month and 18 days. The next morning, September 15th, the Bell County K-9 unit arrived at 9 a.m. 2 dogs, 2 handlers running independently. Both animals tracked from the bus stop to the driveway and stopped. They stopped at the same place, 20 feet from the road, 45 feet from the door, the precise location of the pencil. The handlers ran the dogs twice. Same result. The field report was careful about what it said and what it didn't. Scent trail consistent with a single subject, walking at normal pace from road to mid-driveway. No resumption detected at door, yard perimeter, or surrounding properties. 18+ hours elapsed since event on warm, dry day. Possible trail attenuation beyond termination point. However, drop-off location confirmed consistent across both animals. Possible trail attenuation beyond termination point. That phrase, that hedge, would live in the investigative record for years because it was the only honest thing to say. The scent did not resume at the door. It did not resume at the yard's edge. It did not resume at any neighboring property in any direction. It stopped in the middle of a driveway, the way a sentence stops mid-word, at a place that was not a logical end, a place that had no grammar for stopping. By September 15th, 300 volunteers were searching a 3-mile radius. By September 16th, the NCME flyer was in 42 states. The leads had dried. 1 pencil. 1 scent trail that stopped in gravel, in daylight, 20 feet from the road. That was all. Daniel Reese was at a friend's house when Ethan disappeared. He was brought home by 5:45 p.m. He walked in, looked at his parents and the deputies in the kitchen, and went upstairs without speaking. Sandra found him 40 minutes later, sitting on the floor of Ethan's room, back against the bed, hands in his lap, not touching anything. He was 12 years old and doing the thing 12-year-olds do when something is too large for them, keeping very still as if stillness were a form of holding on. He looked at Sandra when she came in. He said he wouldn't have just left. Not a question, not a plea. A fact from a boy who had played true or make-up with his brother every evening for years and knew, specifically, the difference between the two. Sandra sat down on the floor beside him. She did not answer because she knew he was right, and she did not yet have words for what that meant. They sat there together for a while in the room where the Bridges book was still open on the nightstand and the stones were still in their row on the windowsill, one of them missing. Detective Sergeant Paulette Dryden of Kentucky State Police Post 10 received the case assignment on September 15th. She was 44 years old, 19 years with the state police, and she read the file twice before writing a single word of her own notes. Once fast, once slow, the second time with a pen she didn't use. She drew the driveway on a folded piece of paper. She noted the pencil's position. She noted the truck. She noted Mrs. Compton across the street, home, curtain partially open, sightline partially blocked by the Ford pickup parked at the driveway's left edge. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket. Someone had known that truck was there, had known the specific geometry of a 95-foot driveway on a Wednesday afternoon, the specific 20-minute window between bus drop-off and Sandra reaching the front door, the specific obstructed angle from the one house confirmed to have an adult watching the street. This was not a person who drove past and saw an opportunity. This was a person who knew the driveway. The search ran through September. 300 volunteers at its peak, a grid that covered 3 miles in every direction. Creek beds walked in both directions twice. The NCME flyer went to 42 states. The local TV stations ran the story. Sandra gave 3 interviews in the first 2 weeks, her voice steady in all of them, holding the army green hoodie up toward the camera at the end of each one so the dinosaur patch was visible. By October, the volunteers had gone back to their lives. The trail, such as it had ever been, was gone. Dryden worked the file through the fall and into winter, 73 tips over the following 3 years, each one requiring follow-up, each one consuming the specific controlled hope of an investigator who had learned to hold possibility loosely. A man seen with a boy in a truck outside Lexington, a child matching Ethan's description enrolled at a school in Pikeville, a tip from a woman in Georgia who had seen the flyer at a rest stop and recognized the eyes. Each one was followed, each one collapsed. 3 tips generated secondary interviews. All 3 were eliminated. The case file grew thicker. The leads didn't. 206. Dryden's September 14th call to Sandra. Roy works the overnight shift now, since the separation became a formality. He and Sandra have not divided what happened to them into categories yet. It has not broken cleanly enough for categories. It is simply pressed and pressed until there was nothing left to press with 2007. Daniel drops out of Harlan County High School. He does not explain it to anyone, including himself. He works freight loading at a warehouse in Middlesboro and comes home to an apartment that is the first place he has lived where Ethan has never been, and this is both a relief and unbearable. 2008 NCME releases an age progression image. Ethan as he might appear at 10. Sandy hair slightly darkened. Features beginning to lose their childhood roundness. The image is distributed to law enforcement contacts in all 50 states. Daniel starts a Facebook page. Help find Ethan Reese. He maintains it with irregular posts and consistent private responses to anyone who reaches out. He does not know why he does this, except that it is something, and something is different from nothing in ways he cannot always articulate. 209. A second age progression, age 11. The behavioral identifier list is updated and redistributed. Dryden adds, from a September 14th phone conversation with Sandra, a detail Sandra mentions almost in passing that Ethan had always pressed his left hand to his pocket every time he stood up from sitting anywhere. She'd never thought to mention it before. Dryden writes it in her notebook by hand and adds it to the file. That note, handwritten 5 years after the disappearance, added to a file that had not produced a confirmed lead in 4 years, will matter more than anything else Dryden ever does. She does not know this yet. She writes it down because it is true, and true things belong in the record. 210. The case is cold in every practical sense, though it is never formally closed. Sandra attends a NCME family conference in Louisville. She sits in a room full of parents whose children are missing and learns, for the first time, that there is a specific grammar to this, that the silence of an unsolved case sounds different from grief, that you can be both and feel neither, that the space where a person used to be does not fill with time but hardens around the edges, like a wound that heals wrong. She does not find this comforting. She finds it true. She comes home and keeps the laminated schedule on the cabinet door because she is not ready to take it down, and being not ready for something is not the same as being wrong about it. Roy, in Middlesboro, makes pancakes on Saturday mornings. He makes 2. She has been making 2 since September of 2005 and has never explained this. And Sandra has never asked, and the second plate sits on the counter for the duration of breakfast, and then gets put away, and neither of them speaks of it when they talk on the phone. He calls every September 14th. The calls last less than 3 minutes. They don't talk about Ethan specifically. They just stay on the line. 201. The laminated schedule falls off the cabinet door of its own accord, the tape finally giving up after 6 years. Sandra stands in the kitchen holding it for a long time, the way you hold something when you're deciding whether it is still serving its purpose or whether its purpose was always something different from what you thought. She puts it in the kitchen drawer. She does not throw it away. Lorraine's card is already in that drawer. He's somewhere. Somewhere is findable. The ironing board had gone into the hall closet 2 years earlier, folded there quietly by Lorraine on a Sunday afternoon without comment. Sandra had never asked where it went. The Sunday ironing simply stopped being a thing that happened. The way certain rituals stop, not with a decision, but with an absence that accumulates until you realize it has become permanent. 2012, the case enters its 7th year. Dryden is the only person still calling on anniversaries. She has a folder in the bottom drawer of her desk, photographs, printed, of every missing child she has worked. She does not display them. She does not forget them. She keeps a fresh copy of the Reese file on her desk, reprinted every January, read once fast and once slow. Every year the second reading produces nothing new. She reads it anyway. Daniel's Facebook page has 340 followers. He posts on Ethan's birthday and on September 14th, every year without exception. On the anniversary posts, he writes something short, still looking, still here, and then closes the laptop and sits with whatever the day is for a while before getting on with it. What he does not know on any of these anniversaries is that somewhere in Tennessee, in a house on 4.3 acres, accessed by a private gravel road, the boy he is still looking for is also still here, has been here all along, has been getting up every morning, standing at a kitchen window before speaking to anyone, pressing his left hand to his pocket before walking out of a room, counting stairs under his breath in a house he has been told, for years, is the only house he has. The door frame look, still happening. Every door. Every time. In a house where no one understood what it meant, or noticed it, or thought to stop it. The things a person cannot be made to forget. March 3rd, 2013, 2:14 p.m., Camera 7. Kingston Pike, Knoxville, Tennessee. Her name was Tara Voss. She was a loss prevention officer, 31 years old, and she had been fast-forwarding through security footage for most of her Tuesday afternoon, looking for a shoplifting incident involving a middle-aged man in a red jacket. She was looking at Camera 7, which covered the main entrance, the automatic sliding doors at the front of the store, because the red jacket man had been seen near the entrance on a prior day. At 2:14 p.m., a teenage boy walked toward the sliding doors. He stopped. He looked up at the frame overhead. Not at the doors, not at the sensor. At the frame, the static metal bar above the sliding panels, the part of the entrance no one looks at because there's nothing there to look at. He looked at it for 2 seconds exactly, his chin tilted slightly upward, his body still. Then the doors opened and he walked through. Tara Voss rewound the footage, watched it again. She had a nephew with autism. She recognized a sensory ritual when she saw one. Something moved in the back of her mind, not a specific memory, not a name, just a shape, the ghost of a flyer she had seen somewhere at some point about a boy with habits. She did not throw the footage away. She called her manager. Her manager called Knoxville PD. Knoxville PD called the NCME tip line. And an NCME specialist pulled up a case file that had been sitting in the database since September 14, 2005, and read the behavioral identifier at the top of the list. He always looks up at the door before he walks through it, every door. Every time she watched the footage, she called Daniel Reese's number. He was listed as secondary contact at 11:47 a.m. on March 4, 2013. Daniel was in the parking lot of a Dollar General in Middlesboro, Kentucky, when his phone rang. She sat in his car after hanging up and stared at the windshield for 6 minutes. He was not paralyzed. He was recalibrating the way a person recalibrates when the world, which has been one shape for 7.5 years, suddenly becomes a different shape entirely, and you need 6 minutes before you can drive. Then he started the engine and drove to Sandra's house. Trauma researchers have a phrase for it: procedural memory. The body's filing system for automatic behaviors, the particular way a person ties their shoes, the muscle path their hand takes to a familiar surface, the reflexive tilt of a chin toward an overhead frame. Unlike episodic memory, which is fragile and rewritable, which can be confused and contradicted and slowly replaced with something else, procedural memory lives deeper. In a different filing cabinet, one that is harder to access by someone else's hand. Whatever happened to Ethan Reese between September 2005 and March 2013, whatever name he was given, whatever story he was told about who he was and where he came from, and who his family had been, his left hand still knew where to go. 20 feet inside a store entrance, 8 years and 200 miles from home, his hand went to his pocket, because it always had. Because the body keeps its own records in a language that no one had thought to take from him, because no one had known it was there. The footage arrived at KSP Post 10's Digital Forensics Unit at 40 p.m. on March 4, 2013. Dryden had been at her desk since 3:12 when the NCME notification had come through. She had pulled the Reese file immediately. She had read Sandra's September 14, 2005 intake statement, The behavioral identifier, the exact words. He always looks up at the door before he walks through it. Every door, every time, and then she had read her own handwritten note from the 2009 anniversary call, the one about the pocket, the one she had added to the file because it was true and true things belonged in the record. She had not called Sandra yet. She did not call families on possibilities. She called them on things she could stand behind. Before the footage arrived, she called Detective Ray Solano at Knoxville PD and asked him a single question. "Does he touch his left pocket?" Solano said he hadn't looked for that. Dryden said, "Look at 2:14 p.m. plus about 13 seconds. Solano called back 11 minutes later. He said, "Where do you want me to start?" Dryden sat with KSP digital forensics technician Alan Bresser and watched the footage at normal speed once. Camera 7 retail grade, 213, the timestamp in the lower left corner. The automatic sliding doors, the afternoon foot traffic of a Tuesday. At 14:02, the boy appeared in frame, medium brown hair, lean frame. Gray hoodie, not army green, not the hoodie on every flyer, not the hoodie Sandra had called his armor, but gray, the gray of a teenager who had outgrown the childhood version of himself and been given something unremarkable instead. He walked toward the entrance the way everyone walked toward an entrance without thinking about it, moving through the ordinary mechanics of a Tuesday afternoon. Then he stopped. He looked up. 2 seconds, the chin tilting back, the eyes going to the overhead frame, the body going still in the specific way that a person goes still. When they are doing something their body knows how to do without being told. Not hesitation, not anxiety, something older than that. Something that had been there before he had words for it and had apparently survived everything that came after. Dryden asked Bresser to go frame by frame from the moment of entry. They watched the doorway pause in individual frames. The approach, the stop, the upward look, the hold, the walk through. Dryden wrote one word in her notebook. She did not show Bresser what she wrote. She kept watching at the 20-second mark of the frame by frame, corresponding to timestamp 14:14:14:220. The boy's left hand moved to his front pants pocket. One press, flat palm, then he began walking toward the store's interior. Dryden put her pen down on the desk. The pen made no sound. Bresser leaned back in his chair slightly. He looked at Dryden. "She said that what you were looking for." Dryden picked the pen back up. She wrote a second word in her notebook, below the first. Sandra Reese sat down on the kitchen floor. She had been standing at the counter when Daniel called, her phone in her hand, her weight forward. Her palms nearly flat against the laminate, the way they always were when she was processing something she didn't yet have words for. Daniel had described the footage to her. He had described the doorway pause. He had described the hand going to the left pocket, flat palm. One press 13 seconds after entry. She sat down on the kitchen floor and stayed there for a while. The pocket tap was not in any press release. It was not in any public NCME bulletin. It was not anywhere that anyone could have read it and rehearsed it. It was in Dryden's handwritten case note from September 14, 2009, added to the file during a phone call that Sandra had almost not made because she had been tired that year, tired in the specific way of a person who has been holding something heavy for 4 years and has begun to forget what it felt like to put it down. She had made the call. She had mentioned the pocket, almost in passing. And Dryden had written it down. The pen had made no sound then either.
Cash, water, gone in 8 seconds. Someone had taught him to leave nothing behind. The boy on camera, 7 browsed for 11 minutes. He purchased one item, a bottle of water, with cash. He did not use a store loyalty card. He did not use a debit card, a credit card, any form of transaction that attached a name to a purchase. He paid the exact amount, pocketed his change, and left through the same entrance he had come in. The automatic doors, not triggering the doorway, pause on exit, because the frame sat differently, approached differently, registered differently in whatever part of him performed these calibrations. He turned left outside the entrance. Camera 8, covering the exterior parking lot, captured him for 8 seconds. Gray hoodie, back of a head, medium brown hair, moving at a normal pace toward the southeast lot. Then he stepped out of frame. 8 seconds. Dryden called Solano at 5:31 p.m. She told him they had a near-certain behavioral match. She told him the pocket tap was not in any public document, not anywhere a person could have encountered it, studied it, performed it for an audience. She told him she needed the parking lot canvas accelerated, and she needed every camera within 200 feet of the southeast exit. Solano asked how old the file note was. Dryden said, 5 years. Sandra told me on the phone on the 4th anniversary. I wrote it down. There was a pause. Solano said, okay, I believe you. Knoxville P. Detective Ray Solano conducted the canvass on March 5th and 6th, A neighboring tire and auto shop 200 feet east of the store's southeast exit had an exterior camera covering their driveway entrance. Lower resolution, pointed primarily at their own lot. But at 2 hours 25 minutes and 38 seconds p.m. on March 3rd, that camera had captured something passing on Kingston Pike, traveling east. A dark-colored van, older model, domestic, late 1990s to early 2000s manufacture, a partial plate, 2 letters confirmed, a partial third, consistent with a Tennessee registration. A seasonal worker named Travis Beam, who had been working the store's outdoor garden section that afternoon, told investigators he had noticed a dark-colored van parked in the southeast lot for a while. He estimated 30 to 45 minutes because it was parked slightly over the line, and he had considered saying something. He had not approached it. He could not describe the driver. He described the van as dark, older, with a sliding door on the side. He had not seen it leave. He had not needed to. The van had been moving before the boy reached it, already rolling, low speed, as if the driver had been watching the store's entrance from the southeast lot and had begun moving the moment. The gray hoodie appeared through the exterior doors. 8 years of controlled surveillance-aware movement. A boy who paid cash and walked quickly and left no name on anything. A driver who knew exactly how long 11 minutes was and had been counting. The partial plate to confirmed letters. 1 partial, Tennessee registration. Late 1990s to early 2000s domestic van. Dark blue or dark green. Generated 847 candidates. Vehicles, when run through the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's database, filtered by model, color, range, and year window. The FBI's Crimes Against Children Unit joined the investigation formally on March 8, 2013. Analysts were assigned to work the list in parallel with KSP. The reduction process took 2 weeks. It was not dramatic. It was a spreadsheet being shortened, line by line, across 5 months. Candidates eliminated by current registration status, owner age, and profile. Geographic proximity to both Harlan County in 2005 and Knox County in 2013. And criminal history flags. 846 names crossed off. The work that looks, from the outside, like nothing happening, and is in fact the only thing that was ever going to find him. On August 9, 2013, the list reached a single name. Gerald Wayne Maybury, age 54, Scott County, Tennessee to 67 miles northwest of Knoxville, 94 miles southwest of Harlan County, Kentucky. Owner of a 1998 Dodge Caravan, dark green, employed intermittently as a handyman, an odd jobs contractor, with documented work history in Harlan County between 2002 and 2006, including 2 jobs within 1 mile of Clover Fork Road. A man who had been inside Ethan's neighborhood, who had driven those streets, pulled into those driveways, stood in those yards doing work, who had known, had learned, had memorized, had filed away the specific geometry of a 95-foot driveway, a truck parked on the left, a storm door propped with a brick, a mother 20 feet inside the house. Dryden received the name at 2:14 p.m. on August 9, 2013. She noted the timestamp in her case file. Without comment, it was the same time Tara Voss had watched a teenage boy walk through a door in Knoxville. 5 months earlier, FBI and TBI placed Maybury Scott County property under surveillance on August 12. The property was a single-story house on 4.3 acres outside Huntsville, Tennessee, accessed by a private gravel road and screened from the county road by second-growth tree cover. The 1998 Dodge Caravan sat in a shed adjacent to the house. On August 14th, the second day of surveillance, a teenage boy was observed in the property's rear yard for approximately 40 minutes in the afternoon. He was carrying something. He was alone. He did not look toward the road. The FBI's on-site agent described him in the field report as male juvenile, approximately 14 to 16 years, medium brown hair, lean build, moving normally. Subject appeared calm. Subject did not attempt to signal or flee. A federal search warrant was executed on August 19, 2013. At 6:47 a.m., Special Agent Donna Fitch led the entry team through the front door of a house on 4.3 acres off a gravel road in Scott County, Tennessee, on a morning in late August when the hills were still green and the light was coming in low and gold, the way it comes in at the end of summer. The way it had come in over Clover Fork Road on the afternoon of September 14, 2005. She had read the file. She knew the age progression images. She knew the behavioral identifiers. She moved through the front room, the hallway, the turn toward the kitchen. She stopped in the doorway. He was in the kitchen. He was making breakfast when the agents entered. He stood still, hands flat on the counter, weight slightly forward, the posture of a person who has learned to wait and understand before responding. He was 15 years old, and 4 months. He had been missing for 2,896 days. Fitch crouched to approximate eye level and said his name. His full name, Ethan James Reese. He looked at her for a long time. Then he pressed his left hand flat against his pants pocket. The rock was still there. Not the same rock. The gray river stone from the windowsill on Clover Fork Road. The one that had been missing from its spot the morning of September 15, 2005. The one that had been in his pocket when Wendell Frazier watched him walk up the driveway. That stone had worn smooth and worn smaller and eventually crumbled to grit sometime around his 10th year. The minerals dissolving back into the warmth and pressure of the pocket that had carried it. But the pocket had never been empty. He had found another one, and another after that. The creek behind the Scott County property had stones. He had known which ones to choose. Smooth, a certain weight, palm-sized. The kind that settled against the hip and stayed. He had been choosing them, apparently, since the first one wore out, without instruction, without anyone knowing he was doing it, without anyone understanding what it meant, that his left hand still went there, still pressed, still confirmed. Yes, still here, Fitch's field report noted. Under subject's initial behavior upon contact, subject placed left hand against left front pants pocket, one press, flat palm. Gerald Wayne Mabry was arrested on the property at 6:53 a.m. He did not resist. He sat down on the porch steps when agents approached and put his hands on his knees and looked at the gravel. He had nothing to say that the gravel couldn't hold better than he could. Dryden had promised herself, years before, that if the day ever came, she would be the one to make the call. Not a victims services coordinator, not a press liaison, not anyone operating at the distance of a department. Her, the person who had read the file twice, every January for 8 years, who had called on September 14th every year, without exception, who had written down the pocket tap, because true things belonged in the record. She called Sandra at 7:04 a.m. on August 19, 2013. She said, "Sandra, we found him. He's alive. He's okay." Sandra did not speak for 11 seconds. Dryden counted them not because she was measuring, but because in the silence she needed something to do with her mind, and counting was something. Then Sandra said, "Where is he?" The call lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. When Sandra hung up, she went to the kitchen counter. She stood at it the way she had stood at it on the evening of September 14, 2005. Her hands flat on the surface. Weight forward, the posture of a woman whose body knew this position the way it knew breathing. But this time she was not counting seconds before picking up the phone. She was not preparing to act. She was simply standing, feeling the counter under her hands, feeling the morning, which was the same morning it had always been, and also completely different from any morning that had come before it. She called Roy. He answered on the first ring. She said to words. He was silent for a moment. The specific silence of a man whose emotions operate on a delay, arriving later than the moment that produces them, sometimes days later, sometimes in the middle of the night. This one did not wait. He said, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He arrived in 14. Daniel drove from Middlesboro to Knoxville the morning of August 22nd and waited in the facility parking lot for 4 hours. He did not go in. He sat in his car, the way he had sat in the Dollar General parking lot 3 weeks earlier, not paralyzed, not stuck, but waiting to be ready. Because he knew the difference between those things, and he had always been honest about which one he was in. He was not ready yet. He knew that going in before he was ready would cost Ethan something, and he was not willing to do that. When Sandra came out after the session, she walked to his car and got in the passenger seat. They sat together for 40 minutes, not saying very much. The parking lot was bright and warm and completely ordinary in the way that places are ordinary when extraordinary things have just happened inside them. Finally, Daniel said, "Does he remember true or make-up?" Sandra said she didn't know yet. Daniel nodded. He started the car. Lorraine Combs, 67 years old, in August of 2013, received the news by phone from Sandra at 7:18 a.m. She listened. Then she said, "I told you, somewhere is nibble." Then she said she needed to cook something and would call back. She called back at noon. She brought soup that evening. She did not comment on the soup. Gerald Wayne Mabry was charged in federal court on August 20th with kidnapping of a minor, interstate transportation of a minor for illegal purposes, and unlawful imprisonment. State charges followed from both Kentucky and Tennessee. The federal charges took jurisdictional precedence. The search of Mabry's property documented what 8 years had contained. Ethan had been kept on the 4.3 acres continuously and nearly entirely, with rare supervised off-property excursions. He had been given a different name. He had been enrolled in no school after the first year, educated in a limited, controlled fashion of a person who needed to know enough to function and not enough to leave. He had been told, initially, that his family did not want him back. Then, as the years passed, told nothing at all, as if the question had never existed, as if Clover Fork Road and the storm door and the oak tree named Gerald had been erased not by force but by silence. 1 year at a time. Dr. Annika Reeve, the prosecution's child trauma specialist, testified during pretrial hearings that Ethan presented with significant identity disruption consistent with prolonged isolation and identity replacement, alongside, notably, a preserved core of procedural behavioral patterns that had survived the captivity period intact. The doorway pause, the pocket check, the early morning routine of standing at a window before speaking to anyone, addressing whatever living thing was nearest first. These behaviors had not been trained out of him, Dr. Reeve testified. These behaviors are not remarkable to someone who doesn't know what they mean. A man keeping a child in isolation would not necessarily notice them or think to suppress them. They were invisible, precisely because they were ordinary. That is what preserved them. Gerald Wayne Mabry entered a guilty plea on November 3, 2014, to all federal charges. He gave no explanation. He looked at the defense table when he said the required words. He did not look at the family section of the courtroom, where Sandra sat with her hands in her lap, and Roy sat 2 rows behind Dryden, and Daniel sat beside Sandra, doing the thing he had always done with feeling, keeping very still, holding it privately, not letting it become someone else's problem. Sentencing, February 17, 2015. Life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Dryden was present in the courtroom. She sat in the second row. She had not brought any of the folded spatial reconstructions from her desk drawer. The driveway drawn and redrawn. The truck's position, the pencil's midpoint, the geometry of how a child disappears in daylight. She had brought the folder from the bottom drawer instead. The photographs, every missing child she had ever worked. She did not open it during the proceedings. She held it on her lap with both hands and felt its weight, which was the weight it had always been, and also, now, 1 case lighter. He stopped at the door. He looked up at the frame. He walked through. He had been doing that since he was old enough to walk through doors. In the house on Clover Fork Road, in Loyal Elementary School, counting the 11 stairs after, in a house on 4.3 acres off a gravel road in Scott County, Tennessee, every door, 8 years, unobserved, unnoticed, uninterrupted because it was ordinary, because no one knew what it meant, because the body keeps its own records in a language that belongs entirely to the person carrying it. Nobody could take it from him. Sandra described the doorway, paused to a stranger on the phone on the worst night of her life. She wasn't thinking about evidence. She wasn't thinking about databases or behavioral identifiers or what a loss prevention officer in Tennessee might notice 8 years later. She was just telling someone who her son was, what he did, how he moved through the world, specifically in the ways that were his and no one else's. And that, just that, turned out to be enough. Not the photographs. Not the age of progression images, with their careful arithmetic of years. Not the flyers. Not the Facebook page. Not the grid searches across 3 miles of eastern Kentucky hillside. The thing she said on the worst night of her life. Because it was true. Because she knew her son the way she knew her own hands. Because she had stood outside his closed door for 15 seconds every night. Just listening to make sure the quiet was the right kind. That thing. It was enough. Ethan was reunited with Sandra on August 22, 2013, in a structured setting at the medical facility, with a child trauma therapist present. The reunion was not filmed. It was not observed by law enforcement. What happened in that room belongs to the 2 of them, and to no one else. And that is the correct and only way for it to be. What is known, the session lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. At the 90-minute mark, the therapist stepped briefly into the hallway and found Sandra and Ethan sitting on the floor together, their backs against the wall, both looking at the window. Neither was speaking. Their shoulders were touching. Ethan re-entered formal education at a modified pace. He did not speak publicly for years. His reintegration was slow and non-linear, and conducted almost entirely outside of public view. A deliberate choice that Sandra protected and Dryden enforced, running interference on press requests for the first 2 years without being asked. He spoke publicly once, in 2019, at a NCMEC fundraiser in Louisville, A prepared statement. Read aloud. 4 sentences. He did not take questions. The last sentence was, "The people who looked for me kept looking. I want other families to have that." Sandra was in the audience. She had heard him practice it the night before, in the kitchen of the house, on Clover Fork Road. Standing at the counter, the laminated schedule, long gone from the cabinet door. The drawer it lived in, still holding it, alongside Lorraine's card. She had listened to him read it 3 times. On the 3rd time, she did not offer any notes. She just said, "That's it. That's exactly it." At every NCMEC event she attends, and she attends many, Sandra Reese speaks about the behavioral identifier intake process. She does not speak about Ethan's specific case, by his request. She speaks about the importance of recording the small things, the habits, the gestures that belong to a specific person and no one else. She has advocated for expanded behavioral identifier documentation in every state's missing child reporting protocol. As of the time of this account, 9 states have formally incorporated it. She tells families to say everything, to say the small things, to say the things that seem too ordinary to matter, because ordinary is not the same as unimportant, and the person you are trying to describe is made of ordinary things, is entirely and specifically and irreplaceably made of ordinary things, and those things are what will find them, if anything will. The face changes, Sandra says at these events, standing at a podium in Louisville or Cincinnati or Nashville, in rooms full of families who know exactly what she means before she finishes the sentence. The habits don't end in the audience. People write it down. Dryden retired in 2021. She took the folder from the bottom drawer of her desk, the photographs, every missing child she had worked, printed and held, and brought it home. She did not display it there either. She put it in a drawer in her office. The same kind of drawer. Because some things need to be close, without being visible, and she had always understood the difference. She still drives sometimes, on September 14th. Not to Clover Fork Road. That is not her road to drive anymore, and she knows it. Just drives. Thinks about the driveway. Thinks about the pencil lying in the gravel in the pale gold afternoon light. Yellow against gray. At the exact midpoint between the road and the door. Thinks about what it means that a pencil fell there and not somewhere else. And about all the reconstructions she folded and carried and never quite resolved. And about the fact that she did not need to resolve them. She needed to write down a pocket tap in 2009 because it was true. And she had done that, and it had been enough. Daniel's Facebook page, Help Find Ethan Reese, still exists. He has not taken it down. The pinned post at the top reads, "He's home." Below it, across the years since 2013, thousands of comments from strangers who found the page, who had followed the case, who needed to say something to someone about what it meant that it ended this way. Daniel read every one of them. He responded to none. He did not need to. The page had done its work. And some things, when they are finished, do not require a closing statement. Roy made pancakes the Saturday after Ethan came home. He made a full batch. He did not leave a plate on the counter. He made a full batch, and they sat at the table together. Roy, Sandra, Ethan, Daniel, Lorraine with hard candy in her cardigan pocket. And they ate, and no one said much because they were all still learning. What it meant to have something back that they had been holding at a remove for 8 years. What it meant to let it be close again. What it felt like to let the quiet be the right kind. After breakfast, Ethan went out to the backyard. He stood in front of the oak tree at the left corner of the yard. Gerald, still there, the bark more furrowed than he remembered it. The canopy wider, the base surrounded by the accumulation of years of stones that Sandra had never moved, had never touched, had left exactly as they were. He reached into his left pocket. He pressed his palm flat against it. For a moment, the gesture, the confirmation, still here, and then he took out the stone, not the gray river stone from the windowsill, worn to nothing a long time ago. This one, the current one, smooth, palms, the specific weight of something chosen carefully and carried a long way. He placed it at the base of the oak. It joined the others. The hills above Harlan County were beginning to turn at the highest ridges. The first yellow coming down from the peaks the way it came every September, the way it had come every September of his life and all the Septembers before that. Slow and certain and indifferent to everything that happened beneath it. The stone sat among the others and did not distinguish itself from them in any way. It was just a rock. It was the whole case.